Have you ever treated someone horribly, only to realize they were the most important person in your life? Karen Lancaster lived for luxury. She was the queen of Elmwood Heights, a gated community where only the richest, most elite were welcome. She owned Lux and Grace, an exclusive fashion boutique where silk cost more than a month's rent and handbags were worth more than a working-class salary. Her clients? Wealthy socialites, real estate moguls, and old money elites who sipped champagne while picking out designer gowns. But Karen's real passion wasn't fashion, it was power, and to her, power meant separating herself from the lower class. She despised the poor, she called them lazy, filthy, and a burden on society. Every time she saw a homeless person near her store, she would scoff, roll her eyes, and demand her security escort them away. Her cruelty wasn't subtle. She made sure everyone knew exactly where she stood. Enter Emily, the kind-hearted. Employee Emily Parker had only been working at Lux and Grace for 3 weeks. She was young, soft-spoken, and had grown up in a working-class family, the kind of people Karen looked down on. She had taken the job because she loved fashion. But working under Karen, it was like walking on eggshells. Every day, she watched Karen mock customers who weren't wealthy enough, criticize employees for minor mistakes, and most of all, degrade the homeless. One time, a homeless woman had sat on the bench outside the store, exhausted from the summer heat. Karen had called security, laughing as the woman was dragged away. "She's lucky I don't have the city ban people like that," Karen had sneered. Emily had bit her tongue. She wanted to speak up, but she needed this job, so she did what everyone else did. She stayed quiet. The day that changed everything. That afternoon, Karen was in a particularly foul mood, a shipment of handmade Italian. Shoes had arrived late, a client had cancelled an appointment, and, worst of all, her ex-husband had called. She hated being reminded of her past. She stormed through the boutique, barking orders at employees. "Emily, for God's sake, fix the display. It looks like a bargain store in here." Emily nodded quickly, her hands shaking as she rearranged the handbags. Karen rolled her eyes, and then she saw him. Through the pristine glass windows of Lux and Grace, a homeless man stood just outside, staring in. He was older, his clothes tattered, his face lined with years of hardship. His grey hair was matted, his hands rough and scarred. Karen's face twisted with disgust. She stormed toward the door, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Emily froze. She had seen Karen throw people out before, but this time, something felt different. She didn't know why. She just knew that this moment was going to change everything. The afternoon sun cast a golden glow over Lux and Grace, making the glass storefront shimmer. Inside, the scent of expensive perfume and leather handbags filled the air. Karen Lancaster stood near the cash register, scrolling through her phone, irritated. Her day was already ruined, and now her patience was about to snap because he had appeared. A homeless man stood just outside the boutique. His clothes were tattered, stained, hanging loosely on his frail frame. His unshaven face, lined with deep wrinkles, told stories of a life filled with struggle. His grey hair was matted, his eyes sunken yet strangely familiar, as if they had seen too much of the world. And yet, there was something else, something unexpected, because despite his appearance, his eyes weren't empty. They were watchful, searching, almost hopeful. Karen's stomach turned in disgust. A man like that did not belong here, not outside her store, not in her world. Her lip curled as she stormed toward the entrance, her heels clicking furiously against the tile. Every head in the boutique turned, employees holding their breath, knowing what was coming. Emily, near the display rack, clenched. Her fists. Then the explosion. Karen threw open the glass door, her voice sharp and venomous. "What the hell do you think you're doing here?" The homeless man flinched but didn't step back. Karen's nostrils flared. "Get lost! Now!" I don't need your filth scaring away my customers. Silence. For a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of luxury music playing from inside the store. But then, the homeless man lifted his gaze, and for the first time, Karen really saw him. His eyes weren't just tired, they were looking straight into hers. There was something there, something haunting, familiar. Karen froze. Why did this man's eyes feel like a ghost from the past? Her breath caught in her throat, and then he spoke, a voice, hoarse yet steady. Karen, is that really you? Karen's entire body went cold. Karen's chest tightened. That voice, the way he had said her name like he knew her. No, it was impossible. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to snap out of it. Are you deaf? She snapped, stepping closer. I said leave. But the man didn't move. He just stared at her, his lips parting slightly, as if searching for the right words. Karen's face burned with fury. He was making a scene, and in front of customers no less. Enough was enough. Karen snaps and goes. Too far. With a sharp shove, Karen pushed the man hard. His frail body stumbled backward. His worn-out shoes slipped against the smooth pavement, and then he fell. Hard. His back hit the sidewalk with a sickening thud, and his head knocked against the curb. A few bystanders gasped. The man let out a groan of pain, clutching his head, but he didn't fight back, didn't even look angry. He just lay there, breathing heavily, his eyes clouded with something Karen couldn't understand. For the first time, the onlookers weren't staring at the homeless man in disgust. They were staring at Karen, and their faces filled with shock, judgment, even horror. Emily can't stay silent anymore. From inside the store, Emily's stomach twisted. She had seen Karen be cruel before. But this was inhuman. Without thinking, she rushed forward, shoving past Karen and kneeling beside the man. "Sir!" she gasped, her voice shaking. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" She carefully touched his arm, her hands gentle but urgent. The man groaned softly and tried to sit up. Emily reached for her phone. "I can call an ambulance if..." Then he spoke. And when he did, Emily froze. Because the name he said, it was a name she had heard before, not from a customer, not from a news story, from inside Lux and Grace, from Karen's own office. A name Karen had spoken in hushed, bitter tones. The name of someone Karen had once claimed was dead. And when Emily looked back up at Karen, her boss was standing there, face pale as a ghost. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Karen, her voice barely above a whisper. "Karen, you know him, don't you?" Karen didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even breathe. Emily's hands tightened around her phone. You've said this name before," she murmured, her voice shaky. "I remember it from the office. You mentioned it in a meeting once. She swallowed hard. This is..." Karen's lips parted slightly, but no words came out, because in front of her, sitting bruised and broken on the cold sidewalk, was the one person she had spent decades trying to forget. Then the man spoke, and when he did, it sent a chill through the entire street. "Karen..." A deep, weary sigh escaped his lips, and then, in the softest, most broken voice, "Don't you recognize me? I'm your father." Dead silence. The world stopped. The traffic noise faded. The murmurs from customers vanished. Everything stood still. All eyes were on Karen, her face drained of color, her perfectly done manicure dug into her palms, her heart slamming against her ribcage. This couldn't be real. This wasn't happening. And yet, there he was, the man she had buried in her memories, the man she had told the world was dead, the man she had spent years pretending never existed. But now he was here, alive, and worse. Everyone knew. The world blurred around Karen. The voices, the stares, the murmurs, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. Because right now, she was staring into the eyes of a man she had spent her whole life trying to forget. Her father, her dead father. Or at least, that's what she had been told. The childhood she buried. Karen hadn't always been rich. Once upon a time, she had been a little girl who knew what it felt like to be cold, hungry, afraid. Her father, James Lancaster, was a good man. Hard-working, honest, but honesty didn't protect him from the world. One day, everything changed. A bad investment. A fraudulent business partner. In a matter of months, he lost everything. Their house, their savings, their future. Karen could still remember the nights spent in motel rooms, sometimes even sleeping in the car when there wasn't enough money. She could still hear her mother's furious whispers late at night. "You ruined us, James. Our daughter deserves better than this." Then one morning, her father was gone. Karen had cried for days, asking where he was, and her mother, she had looked Karen straight in the eyes and said, "He's dead. He left us with nothing and now he's gone." Karen had believed her. For 20 years, she had lived with that truth, and when she finally clawed her way out of poverty, she vowed never to look back. She erased him from her life, from her heart. And yet, here he was, the father who never stopped. Searching James looked at her, his eyes glassier now, his hands trembling slightly. "Karen," he whispered, his voice softer now. "I've been looking for you for 20 years. Karen staggered backward. "No." She shook her head, her breath ragged. "No, you were dead. Mum told me you were—" James let out a weak chuckle, filled with nothing but pain. "Your mother," he muttered. She didn't want you to know the truth." He took a slow, shaky breath. "I tried to come back. I tried to find you," he said, voice thick with emotion. "But by the time I did, you were gone, moved away, and I—" His throat tightened. "I lost everything, Karen. And without you, I had nothing left to fight for." Karen's heart pounded. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But the pain in his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was still his little girl, it was realer than anything she had ever known. And now, she had a choice, to face the truth or to walk away. Again, Karen couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened, her vision blurred, and her body felt like it wasn't even hers anymore, because the truth had hit her like a wrecking ball. She had spent her entire life believing her father was dead. She had spent years building herself up, looking down on those who had nothing, convincing herself that she was better than them. And now, she had just shoved her own father to the ground, humiliated him, tried to erase him. Again, the weight of it all came crashing down at once. The whispers around her grew louder. Did she really just— her own father? How could she do that? Emily, still kneeling beside James, looked up at Karen, eyes filled with tears. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through Karen like a knife. "You just threw away the man who gave you life." Karen's legs gave out. She collapsed to her knees, her hands clutching her face, and for the first time in years, Karen Lancaster sobbed, not the controlled, quiet tears of a woman who could fix everything, but the gut-wrenching, broken cries of someone who had just lost everything and knew she deserved it. The father who never stopped loving her. James watched her, not with anger, not with resentment, but with sadness, and then with something Karen had never expected. Love. He lifted a trembling hand toward her. "Karen," he said softly, "I've been looking for you for 20 years. Karen's breath hitched. She lifted her tear-streaked face, eyes red, swollen and full of pain. She had spent so much time running from her past that she had become the very thing she once feared. Now, she had a choice: to reject him again, or to finally face the truth. The world waited, and in Karen's heart, she knew this was the moment that would define her forever.